Hello, this is Jaymz Bee in your face. Yes, it's a visual podcast, a vodcast every Friday. I've got a fabulous guest coming up. I've got listings for some local clubs if you're looking for things to do in the next week. And I'm going to be giving a couple of quick thank yous. In fact, maybe I'm thanking you. If you have donated on Patreon, it means a lot to me, and I would love to keep the love flowing. If you haven't, it's easy. Sign up on Patreon right here, and $5 a month, $10 a month, whatever you want to do. Help a freelance artist move things forward. I do a lot of art, but I also want to promote other people. Whether it's music or sculpture or dance or something cool in a club, it could even just be a great party. I want to include everybody, and that means you. So please help support me. And meanwhile, all this stuff's free. You can just log on every Friday and see some clubs. I do want to thank Barbarian Steakhouse, 7 Elm Street. They're very helpful. They're also really great on the scene, not just for podcasts and charity events, but just a nice place to go for dinner. They do have a big heart over there. Aaron Barbarian and his crew, lots of charity involvement, and I want to thank them. And I also want to thank Captain Paul Barber. He loves music, but his specialty is finance. So if you want to know a lot about music, call me. If you want to know a lot about finance, call Captain Paul, although you could probably call him about music too. He was a fan of people like Michael Bublé and Feist, way before they were famous, so maybe he knows a little about music too. Anyway, we're moving on right now to the Old Mill, Toronto. Tonight, Fawn Fritzen is in town from the Yukon. She's got a gorgeous voice, lovely woman, and she's playing with David Restivo, and that is going to be a big deal, and Red Schwager on guitar. So Old Mill, Toronto, Homesmith Bar, 7:30 to 10:30, and never a cover. $20 minimum, but that's easy. Also, tomorrow, David Restivo is sticking around 2 nights in a row. He's in from Nelson, BC, and he's got Elisa Falk on drums, visiting from the U.S., and Paul Novotny, the great bassist. So Friday, Saturday, Homesmith Bar, Old Mill, and you can't go wrong. Over at Hughes Room Live, they are taking a break for the summer, just for a week and a half. September 3, they're coming back with Robbie Botosh and some exciting things. I'll tell you more about that next week, but you can always check out and get tickets in advance for September at hughesroomlive.com. Jazz Bistro, PJ Perry is in town from Winnipeg, one of the hardest players. Bebop nutso. This guy's got so much power in his playing. He can also do a lovely ballad, but I love to watch him just work it out. And he's with the Bernie Sinensky trio, part of his quartet. So that's going to be fun, and that's tonight and tomorrow. jazzbistro.ca, and next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, it's the Steve Coven Trio. So that is going to be one happy piano, having Bernie there this week and Steve Coven next week. Lula Lounge, it's Havana Club Friday, and that kicks off with Felipe Veloso, followed by Papiosco, who is a beloved percussionist. Bring your dancing shoes, come for dinner and stay all night. It's such a party over there. Salsa Saturday continues at Lula Lounge with the SWA Salsa Orchestra. Now, I don't know if you've been there, but you go in for dinner at night on a Friday, go on a Saturday, have a little meal, and the bands sometimes play in front of the curtain, but when the dance band starts, the curtain's open and there's a huge band on stage. It's so much fun. Lula.ca for that one. And now we're going to go to my special guest. Are you ready for this? Oh, I should tell you who it is. It's Stephen Weir. He is a photographer, a journalist, a publicist. I've known him for many years as a publicist, but also a diver. Didn't know that. So let's find out more about Stephen Weir right now. Hey, how are you, Stephen?
Excellent.
You are, in my opinion, a culture hero. You do so many interesting things, whether it's photojournalism, actual journalism, publicity, and something about diving, which I just found out about. How would you describe what it is you do?
I think that what I do is unique to Toronto, in that if you are any one of those things you said, except for maybe a diver, it's very hard to make a living. So I combine it all. My bags are always packed, so if somebody wants me to go somewhere, the answer is always yes. So some weeks I'm a journalist, some weeks I'm a photographer, but it's a unique thing to Toronto, and it's also an age factor because I know everyone. I know you.
Yeah. Well, I've known you for decades, and I first met you, I first really got to know you through McMichael Gallery. You were doing a lot of work for them.
That's right. I was there about 16 years. I buried Robert McMichael. I buried Mrs. McMichael, and I was at the funeral for Casson. So the group of seven is really in my blood. But what was sort of really odd about that gig was that just before I started work there, my wife and I bought a house in Yonge and Egg. And it turned out that the house was owned by the man who used to frame for the group of seven. And he never fixed the house up, and when the family moved out, they took all their group of seven, and the place is a dump, right? So I was up in my attic office, and I kept getting visited by the group of seven. And if you know your group of seven, you know there's 10. But anyway,
Exactly.
I am not sure who they were, but I kept getting these like weird voices late at night, and then we cleared some raccoons out of an unused chimney, and the group left. And then I started working at the McMichael Gallery. So
Wait a minute. You cleaned the attic and the voices left.
well, the chimney, and it was filled with raccoons and filled with we didn't have bed bugs, but we had fleas, everything, and then we cleaned the house out, and the haunting ended. So I think it was just me interpreting raccoon noises, and so that sounds like Lauren Harris. So yeah, I was at the group, did a lot with the group of seven. They hold a special place in Canadian art, and since then I've had a lot of gigs trying to help the memories of artists that never made it because of the group of seven. Like, they were so powerful that if you were a woman, you couldn't sell a painting. If you were a painter, but you didn't have that showmanship like the group of seven did.
And that's a good point you're bringing up, because you have an exhibit coming up in Brampton.
Yeah. The guy's name is, the man's name was George Padgington. Mm-hmm. And he was sort of the patron saint of landscape painting in Peel County. I mean, he did paint other places, he did get away, but for 37 years he worked at the Toronto Star, and he was doing a lot of setup and design of papers. And back then it was lead type, and pagination is a term that's disappeared, but that's what he did. And his paintings were incredible.
They're beautiful.
Yeah, it's like a little contemporary, but really group of seven. And he didn't have the balls, to push himself. He stayed with his job. It was a steady paying gig. He wasn't ready to take 6 months off and go up north or whatever. Mm-hmm. So he lived and died with really not too many shows. Not many people knew about him. But now he's coming back. And there's been a few other shows. I worked with Hamilton Gallery of Art, and we had a show called Beaverbrook. And it was all the women of this school of Beaverbrook from Montreal. Hussey was one of them, but they had some incredible paintings, better than the group of seven, although, now that I'm not in the McMichael, I can say that. And for 30, 40 years, nobody ever heard of them. Now, they're like blowing everybody away in Canada and Europe and the US, but of course they're all dead. So they never really did get the fame they owed. Also worked on a show, a private collector, and nobody's seen this podcast that's ever seen his paintings, but if you go to the auctions, Waddington's for sure, they're trading at about $300,000 a painting. Same deal. He never ever had a big show. He was so shy. He just painted and couldn't understand why nobody loved him. He died in poverty, and a woman who was rich got him out of a home on St. Clair and Yonge, just around the Beltway, and he moved in with her. And subsequent to that, her husband passed away, and she found out she also was broke, and she ended up moving into the same home that she'd rescued Shepherd from. She died in poverty, and all of her paintings were spread out. And a collector in Brampton, in Kleinburg, started buying all his paintings with his wife, and they found them in warehouses and in basements, and he has bought them all up.
Isn't that a beautiful adventure, to go searching like that?
Yeah.
You don't even know where you're going, you're following leads?
And then for 40 years, he's had this, I can't tell you where it is, I'm seriously sworn, his house, and maybe only 10 people in the world have been in, and it's an art gallery this man's paintings, but he doesn't allow you in because of insurance problems. So now he's been gradually, 40 years later, selling paintings that he bought for $400, $300, $200, and they're selling for $300,000. And people like the Thompson family, it's like anytime you mention Shepherd, like their eyes go like that. So I like stuff like that. I do a lot of, like you, I'm everywhere, and I like
Right, because it's not like you're only into fine art.
Yeah, and I do a lot of things with the Caribbean community, and I did Caravana for 16 years doing the PR, and I'm working for one of the newspapers, and any group that needs my help, and they're not making a profit, so they're non-profit, I give them everything free. And that does lead to work, but so I probably do 20 or 30 cultural events that nobody's ever heard of, like midnight fashion shows in warehouses up in Scarborough, where if you don't know the password, you don't get to see it.
Well, when people ask me why do I know so much about the city, it's because I follow guys like you, and you follow my thing. Like when we're in touch with each other and we give each other tips. You had something about Obeah Opera in one of your articles. You wrote a story about the Obeah Opera. That was an amazing little show, and then I went and saw the full show. How would you be invited to something like that, or did you hear about that?
Both. But I was because I do write because the Price is Right. I've been picked up by this newspaper, so I for about 3 years I've been writing 3 pages of culture. I can give them 12 pages, but it's so I'm really in the know, and my wife and I have been following dance forever, and so I was aware of the curator or the choreographer, and have been invited to a couple of the workshops. So I followed it. I followed it for the newspaper, and I followed it for my passion. And again, certainly with the Caribbean community, they have some strikes against them, but at the same time, they have so much going on. So someone like me, who isn't Caribbean, all I do is go in and say to people that should know, it's like, you should pay attention to this artist or this music or that whatever. I also do work with the Sikh Heritage, as they pronounce it, the Sikh Heritage Month, and that's sort of the opposite of the Caribbean, because they have four members of Parliament just around the community, the Peel region, and they're extremely powerful. And so when they have a cultural event, it's totally different. Whereas with the Caribbean stuff, it really deserves to be a story to be told. And I think if people could find the time to come out at midnight, learn the password, and come in, it's just, you'd be blown away.
You really are accepted in these things, whereas some people, journalists, they're only looking for the one bad thing that happened somewhere, and you're looking for all the beauty around the thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing with the city of Toronto, and we're such a diversity, and I think everybody tries to get along. In terms of the Caribbean community, especially when I worked with Caravana, we got such bad knocks, really, really bad knocks. And I worked on a committee that anytime between July and August, there was a shooting or a shooting, it would pop up as a Caravana killing or Caravana shooting, and it had nothing to do with what really is a celebration of the emancipation of slaves, both in the U.S. and Canada, and it's really it's tough. I also work with a Holocaust survivor, Max Eisen, and the deal is that I drive him to events. He talks. I sell his books, and the deal is it has to be an even $20 because I can't do change. And then at the end of his talk, I give him a bag of money, and then normally, he just donates it back to his community. So it's a thing that I go to, and I can't stop crying. I can't even talk about him.
Right.
But yet, somebody in Toronto slashed swastikas over his poster outside the synagogue. So there's an undertone in Toronto, and I think I find that I try to look at the really good stuff, and there are. I mean, I've been at events where there's shootings. I've gone to shootings. I've represented murder victims. That's really tough to do. The family of murder victims.
Right, right. Yeah.
I had a man in Canada who was deported to Trinidad because he had been living off the avails, and he'd come to Canada at the age of 9, but never got around to getting his citizenship. The rest of the family, doctors, lawyers, they're all Canadian citizens. Police raided his girlfriend's house, and he was in Trinidad the next, shortly thereafter. Everybody in Trinidad was suspicious of this guy just showing up, and some locals went in and cut his head off and put it on a fence post. And so the family came to me in Canada and tried to get media to, it's just like anything else, trying to get the media aware of the problem. So I've represented a couple families like that where they need somebody to stand up for them. I can't feel their pain the same way, but if there's somebody whose son has been murdered and all of a sudden there's like 20 media trucks out front, they do need help. And this is the sort of stuff. I don't charge. I just try not to cry.
Right.
And,
hey, you did a story about Rochdale. Half the people listening to this podcast know what that means. The other half have no idea what Rochdale is.
It's really funny because I was constantly going to, when I went to Ryerson, I was constantly, in like early 70s, I was constantly lining up with the wrong people. So I'd move in a house and a month later we'd break up, right? Everybody would break, all of a sudden you'd have to leave. And I ended up at Tartu, which was right across the street from Rochdale. Same construction, the same units, 6 units, but it was run by the Estonian Foundation, and so I had a front seat on Rochdale. I just used to watch out the window. It was like you didn't need TV.
So that was kind of a commune. It was run by youth, and everything in the building was it turned into a flop house of craziness, but I think the original purpose, right, was an experiment to see if people could...
It was a student-run thing, but they also wanted to teach. So there were courses. A lot of people that, anyone that goes to theater past me or I and maybe remembers the old plays like Odeon Paradise and I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but they would have rehearsal space at Rochdale in what was supposed to be the garage. There was Toronto's first vegetarian restaurant. There was half the Radicals. I don't know if Bob Ray was there, but Spencer. A lot of the names, mostly white. A couple of early black activists. And
right, it was known as a place where kind of the Black Power movement of Toronto was happening too, yeah.
A lot of drugs, I was like, my window, I was right beside the Korean United Church. It's a church on Bloor that shares its chapel with every known religion. So the bells start ringing at 4 a.m. And so I found out, why was I able to get this room? Because I was right even with the bells. So I was up weird hours and just watching Rochdale, and a cop car pulled up to the front where the statue is. Anybody that's on Bloor knows the statue. And they came up and they were trying to round up a lot of nudists that were just naked on the street and they were sort of getting them all back into the building when somebody dropped a brick off the roof of the building, and it went through the cop car, and so then it turned bad. And then from then on, the police would park on the street. So that was sort of frustrating.
And were you there when they emptied the place out after the rent wasn't paid and all that?
No, it got really bad. It was sad, and there was they couldn't get plumbing, they couldn't get anything done because nobody was paying. And
was this the same time as the Yorkville cleanup as well? Was it kind of the same time? Or was
no, it was after. It was after that.
It was after, okay.
And so that we were talking in the 73, 74, 75, and then they just welded the door shut. And but the funny thing,
they actually welded the door shut. You could not get in. Yeah.
So the funny thing was, we went to the play, and I did a story for a newspaper because it was really that was the start of black awareness in terms of a political movement for young people. Others would like Charlie Roach and that would disagree that it was. Anyways, so I went, and there was 5 people in the talk back with with the people that wrote it. Of course, nobody that acts in it or wrote it or directed it was alive when Rochdale was. So it was sort of mythical, and but the irony is that there was 5 people in the audience that got thrown out. Right, the door was welded. I think their possessions were all Canadian. We did nice little piles, and now they can go back because it's a senior citizens home.
The same people who got thrown out can legally go in.
They can legally go in there, and then somebody to do their ponytails, and it's So anyways, it was a play that was part of a fringe theater. No, it was sort of Summer Works. I shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
So it was really, really good.
Cool. One more quick thing from your writing experiences, because I know you're a diver and a photographer and a journalist, and sometimes you can mix that all up. What about the ruby slippers story from The Wizard of Oz? You wrote something about a dive. They were diving to look for them?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing with diving is that bad people, or crazy people, or whatever, they always think they can hide stuff in the water. Right, and I was not involved in the ruby slippers, but I had.
But you wrote about it.
Yes, yeah. I did. And what happened is that I have a friend, underwater videographer, who shoots movies, TVs, and was at that time also working for the police. So he would have 8 to 10 weeks off, and so he got hired to do stuff. I didn't go on most of these. He'd offer, but usually when people lose things or throw things or hide things in the water, it's really disgusting. So he'd just come off looking for James Hoffa in a river in Michigan, and he had all his gear, and it was a well-paying gig, and they never found it. And so he was one of the Great Lakes looking for these things because somebody in prison had said something about them, and nobody got rich. My friend got to dive in mucky waters, yeah. And I mean, I write about diving. I've had some, maybe as for you with jazz, because of your involvement with jazz, people probably assume that your love of jazz, you're willing to take chances, right? That they will take you to theaters maybe you shouldn't be going into, or they'll be putting you in situations where they figure that
if you love jazz, you'll love this,
and that we're immune to crime, or in my case, and so what's been happening, and I was always writing about boating, is that people were inadvertently thinking that I really don't mind facing death, right? So now as the older I get, it gets harder to dive, and the situations have been really frightening. I mean, like, just shit in your suit. It's really, really, so that's been a trend, and I think what's happening in the water today is that anybody that's dove for a long period of time, you go underwater 40 years ago, and I'd write it all up, and now you go back, and there's nothing happening there, and the fish species that should be there aren't, and so what you're getting is a lot of sharks that are coming in looking to eat anything, which more and more is people, and so I've had a couple of situations where I'm hardly diving anymore. I was scared, so scared, and if you can't with your camera, but if you stuck your camera in my mouth, I've tattooed my name and my social insurance number so that the coroner can identify me if I get attacked by sharks, and it's just I stopped diving for 2 years after running into a tiger shark. I just it's too long a story, but I was diving as a journalist, being taken by the Fort Myers tourist board, and they took us 5 hours out into the Gulf of Mexico, and we're diving nowhere when a storm came up, and these guys from the tourist board hadn't slept, and they wanted to get pictures of me taking pictures of them spearing fish, and then when we got in there, we found that the tiger shark was harvesting the fish, and somebody from the tourist board that had been assigned to me was a smaller woman, had been sucked away by the current immediately after we got in the water, and our boat was empty. Nobody was in the boat, and the sharks kept circling us, and they were 14, 15 feet deep, big, and we decided to come up, and the current took us about a mile from our boat in the space that it took to go 100 feet up, and there was no woman. We were just there. We could barely see the boat. We'd go up on a wave, and then we could see the boat down there, and we'd swim like that. And when we got to the trough, one of the two guys that was with me would go underwater and with the spear gun would smash at the sharks so that they would swim off, and then they'd come back, and they'd come back. And when we just got about to the boat, I ran out of air, and I started drowning, and then were sharks, and then one of them thought, oh God, he's the journalist, I better rescue him. So they pulled me up onto the boat, and no woman. So we're going to leave her. A bad storm was hitting us, and we're going to go as far as we could in towards land so that we could get a cell phone. But we couldn't start the motor because it had flooded. So we spent about an hour they spent an hour, and I just sulked at the back of the boat thinking this woman who I'd only met 10 minutes before we hit the water was dead. And then I could hear this, like, fuck off, and there's this voice off in the distance, and it's the woman, and she had smart enough to have what they call an E-perm, and so she knew where the boat was, but she was lighter and smaller than us and getting blown an extra mile out, and so that's the story. But I guess
so they heard her voice, and she didn't get eaten by sharks, and
we didn't jump in to help her because it was still filled with sharks. Because you'd gone this far. And so I came back to Canada, and I thought, so there's nothing I can't do now.
But she wasn't injured. She's probably pretty pissed at everybody.
She and I, no, she. I mean, I was the sucky as well. We trusted these people that the government had given us, so we had a bond, and we sat at the back of the boat, and I had brought. When it's a government person, you don't want to tip them but I usually would take a case of beer, and you can't really drink until you're
done your mission, yeah.
But she and I just sat at the back of the boat, and when we got back close to Sanibel Island, they wanted to take me to the dock, and I was so mad. I just said, no. I jumped in, and when I was about a mile away, and found a cab, and so. But
so that was it. That was
So that was sort of age catching up with me, and you and I've been talking about getting on the subways, and I swim all the time. I keep in shape, or I try to keep in shape, and I didn't realize how old I must look to millennials that keep they feel so proud. I'm going to give that man a seat. I mean, just want to.
Yeah, I'm not that old, and I'm not limping. Please, I'll
You're
stand.
Not a tiger shark. You come back when you can buy. So so I'm very aware. So I'm really trying to cut back a little, and I think with some of the events that I'm doing, I'm trying to be a little bit more safety aware. And it's not just, I'm not just talking about getting, having crime, but the millennials, those young people today will put up with so much crap when they go to concerts that you can get bounced, and, you can stand up for 3 hours waiting to get in, you get treated like crap, you pay extra money. No, I'm not paying like you get to a certain age and everything's free.
Yeah.
So,
but it is amazing what people will put up with.
Yeah. And then you find out they're singing into tracks, and you've lined up for 3 hours to watch a man sing tracks.
Right.
And so the shark thing that was when I entered that next phase of my life where I'm going, holy crap.
More writing, more publicity, and photos above water.
Photos above water, and also less. I'm not getting as much paying gigs, and I'm doing a lot more stuff that I feel good in my soul. I had a period in my life, about 16 years, where I promoted nothing but army stuff, cruise missiles, things that you wouldn't think that you have to promote a missile, but it's the same world. In fact, some of the tricks that I learned, not tricks, but things that I used to promote a ballet, I learned promoting missiles. But I just like to do good now.
Right.
So
Cool. So you are working again on this thing in Brampton. Can you tell us about the opening of
So
Pava?
Brampton is like, it's a 150-year-old building. It's like an old prison. It's a courthouse. Half the movies that you see where it's like in like the Monkey Trials or something, it's Brampton. It's this museum. And it's a place that it's only about, if you lived in Etobicoke, it's only about a 20-minute drive. But for the 416ers, it's like, Brampton? Oh my God. It's Hamilton's the same problem. Because you get these great stuff. So we've got a show coming up, and we wanted to have people come out. And the museum is cheap. It's like $5, which by Brampton's standards is pretty expensive. But it's a great museum, incredible art, and we just wanted to have an evening, like an opening that was music, fun, and saluting this guy that nobody's heard of. Like, nobody's ever heard of him.
Gorgeous paintings.
And they should.
Right.
They'll walk out and go, wow, how did I miss that? And so it's the thing. That's what we're doing. And we hardly ever have openings in Brampton. So if you come to the gallery, you'll be really amazed in that you think of Brampton as, I'm in Cabbagetown right now, where this museum is downtown. There's about a 5-block radius of Cabbagetown, and you'll go, I didn't know this existed.
All little old houses from the 1800s or whatever.
Yeah, and big houses.
And big houses, right.
William Davis, remember, he was Rochdale. He was actually Rochdale time. He's still alive, and he lives across the street, and it's very cool.
Right on.
And it's worth coming out. The idea that you can only get good art below 416, that there's no good art painted above the 401, or there's no good jazz past the 427, is just not true. And so we're hoping that people will come out.
What's the date on that?
Do not do that to
me. You know what? It's above your head right now. There's a link above your head as I'm talking to you. So right there. Yeah. You have an amazing memory, great storyteller, and you're a culture hero. Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. All right. Well, that was illuminating. Hope you enjoyed it. And I'm back next Friday with another special guest. Please log on to jaymzbee.ca and you can see all the podcasts. Go through all the special guests I've had over the years. June Garber, Barbara Leka, David Clayton Thomas, lots of cool stuff at jaymzbee.ca. See ya.